Okay, so let's get started with the post-lunch session. Um, First off is our panel. I've been told that this is the first time a panel has been organized in SpaceSec, so no pressure. So we have four amazing panelists, starting from Ashok Prjapathi from NASA. You heard him as a keynote speaker. Then we have Dan Wallach from DARPA, Martin Strohmeier from Armasuisse, that's the Department of Defense in Switzerland, and then Stephen Schwab from USC. So if you folks can take one of those chairs, and there's a small logistical thing that we didn't really foresee. I'm going to excuse ourselves because this is the first time we are organizing a panel. If you want anything that you say to be recorded, video, you need to be here. Because the wide angle is here, focused. Camera is focused here.
Okay, but this microphone works? Yours do.
Yeah. All right. So audio is going to be recorded. So the format of this panel is simple. The topic is space security priority, what matters most. The panelists had been given the idea that what is that one topic, task, method that we all as a SpaceSec community have to look into. And they're going to argue for their own topic, and then we will have the discussions. So first up is we go by the order of Ashok, followed by Dan, followed by Martin, followed by Stephen to give their pitch, and then we open up for Q&A. So Ashok, please. First of all, please welcome our panelists. First time running a panel, so you forget to welcome them. So,
you want us to come there?
Yeah. Yeah, if you are here, it's on video. If you are not, then only audio.
Okay, thank you once again. I'm back. So to me, what I would say is like based on my about 20 plus years of experience, I would go with like one thing what I felt not good about, created systems years when I'm ready to deploy, and somebody comes from cyber group saying, no, now you have to go through this testing. Like, okay. And then you find some things, and it takes another year to fix those. And that led me think, and I think somebody coined this word called cyber-informed engineering. And I think I'm a very big supporter of that, and that's what I especially talk to my team within NASA as well. Like we have been doing this for all those years, but we have never thought about it. And thought, hey, we don't need it because we're never gonna be exposed beyond those boundaries. So to me, it seems this cyber-informed engineering is most important today. So when you're trying to build a system, you incorporate all these cyber needs in your design instead of waiting for last minute. And so it's about mindset. I would say, like speaking to many engineers, especially in space, doing flight software, and many people like, hey, it's just mindset. They do not think about it. And that's the paradigm shift, especially I'm bringing to my team as well. Like, hey, we have to start thinking this cyber from the beginning, not at the end because cyber group wants us to test something and you test it. No, it has to be part of design so you can think through properly. You have to think like a hacker. What are the avenues a hacker can exploit and get into your system? So once it's part of your mindset, I think you're safe. So that is where things start. And to me, it's like this cyber-informed engineering is the most important topic, and everybody should focus on it. And being you, research community on space, hey, provide us guideline so we become cyber-informed engineering. So maybe all of you as a community should work on the guidelines we should follow as an engineer, so this becomes part of our daily lives, so we do not struggle later in the stage. With that, I'll pass on to Martin. Oh.
It's a free panel.
All right, hey everybody, I'm Dan Wallach at DARPA, on loan from Rice University, where I'm still technically a professor. I've been getting interested in space security for the past couple months, and it all started when somebody said a wrong thing that got my head twisted up. And the wrong thing they said was, and I'm going to quote this roughly, oh, the Rust programming language is no good for space because it's too fragile. If there's any error, then all your security's gone. And I'm like, what? Huh? But that got me thinking, well, wait a minute, what's the actual problem? And that has led me in two very specific directions that I've been thinking a lot about. So thing one, what makes space different from the ground? Well, radiation. Computers in space fail in ways that computers on the ground don't. And mostly the people who think about this are electrical engineers. And with the conferences that you can go where they talk about radiation, it's a bunch of electrical engineers. And the computer scientists, by and large, aren't in the room. And I'm hoping to do something about that. So I actually see this as a compiler problem. How do we synthesize code compiler people have spent decades trying to make code run faster. Or some compiler people have tried to make code smaller. But none of them have ever tried to make code more robust. That's not totally true. There's one or two counterexamples. But I think this is an interesting, very fertile ground for trying to add resilience in the compiler. And then you might say, well, how come nobody did it before? And I dug into that, and it turns out the answer is because nobody had a good model, like a microarchitecturally accurate model of a CPU on which they could simulate these kinds of failures to try to predict them. And the big thing that is going to change everything is the NASA high-performance space computer that we heard a little bit about earlier. So let me give you a couple extra specs. It's a 1 gigahertz, 8-core RISC-V with all the performance extensions, vectors, SIMD, the works. And it's cheap. You can have a dev box on your desk this year for $3,000. Space rated next year. This thing is going to be everywhere. And it does one very specifically cool thing to my perspective as a software guy. It provides you telemetry from all the error correction hardware. Which means as a software person, you can see the hardware trying to fix the errors. And that means that I can synthesize code that uses that telemetry to do things. Exactly what, I'm not sure about, but that's kind of where my brain is at. Is that a security problem? Well, yes, because if you're implementing, I don't know, a crypto system, you cannot tolerate a single bit error, even when you're operating in a degraded environment. So some algorithms might be more robust, like if you're doing some kind of a gradient descent solver kind of algorithm. If you get minor errors in the low bits, you're still going to converge on the same answer. But if you're computing an encryption or a decryption, you cannot tolerate bit errors because then you'll end up leaking your secret key. So that's sort of thing one I've been thinking about. Thing two I've been thinking about. No, we were supposed to only talk about one, but I'm going to talk about two.
I love it to you.
So the second thing I've been thinking about is it turns out software updates in space suck. Because the bandwidth we have, the control channel bandwidth, in some cases is like 2 to 4 kilobits. Think like modems of the 1980s. Some of you are old enough to remember this. That's it. If you're going through the deep space network, you get 2 to 4 kilobits. And if you're trying to do a non-trivial security patch, like you're uploading a whole extra libraries, extra modules, extra features, actually shoving all that code through this tiny little straw sucks. So I think we have a code compression problem, or a patch compression problem, or something. And how do we make code very, very small? Well, turns out there has been some work on this in weird parts of computer science history. Like, anybody here old enough to remember a Mac 128K? Some of you? So the way they fit Microsoft Word into 128 kilobytes of memory, including the operating system and your user data, there wasn't enough room for the code, so they had a P-code machine. And Word was not compiled for 68,000 assembly. Word was compiled for this P-code machine, a stack-based machine. Yes, really. That was how they fit Microsoft Word into a tiny little Mac. And Microsoft actually repeated that feat multiple times over the years. They had a bunch of internal P-code interpreters because their code was smaller. And I think there's and you stretch forward, JVM bytecode is the same kind of idea. Dalvik, somewhere in between. I think there's an opportunity to rethink the intermediate representation to the point of, these days, let's do some kind of crazy search and optimize exactly the bytecode for the code that we're trying to compile, and then synthesize the interpreter for it. Why not? As long as it gets smaller, we still win. So these are the kinds of things I've been thinking about that to me are, like, nowhere else in computer science do we have these weird constraints. And so I think these are, these are both security adjacent concerns, and that's what I'm currently studying, but I came here to learn about more. So with that, I'll hand it off to our next panelist.
So, well, whenever this comes up. All good. Well, it's here. Yeah, perfect. Oh, that was a very helpful introduction and maybe a good basis for a debate, I think. Because what I did when Anjan asked me to bring something to this panel was I asked the previous chairs of this workshop and the keynote speakers what they were thinking about what's the most important thing to work on. And they all said that ultimately, looking at all these papers having been submitted over the 3 years of this workshop and what we're working on, space is not actually that unique. There are some of these problems, radiation, yes, but from a computer science perspective, in principle, we have all these security solutions and problems already. And we've actually seen this in the keynote in the morning. When you talk about your roadmap for CFS over the next 3 years, you said, I think. I mean, all of these things from zero trust to having encryption for the link, I mean, that's not new. We've been doing this for decades. The question is, why haven't we been doing it in space? Some of this, it's about being constrained, absolutely. But we're not that constrained in satellite and spacecraft. Most of them can do encryption. I mean, there's no reason not to do AES on most of these spacecraft, right? It's not a problem, but why are we not doing it? Maybe the mindset. That was probably that point, how we're changing this mindset. But yeah, so I think from a research perspective, space is weird. That's what James Pavur said in the original keynote here. But space cybersecurity is not actually that unique. It's all existing principles, some different contexts for sure, but the principles are not new. So what is a bit unique, maybe, let's talk about this. Radio frequency constraints certainly are interesting. They are unique. We have very asymmetric links very often. That's a bit unusual. Uplink, downlink to satellites are often very different bandwidth, different modulation, different targets even. Definitely very special, not completely unique, but definitely special is satellites have a very long uptime, independence. We shoot them into space, and then we don't get them back down for an update, right? I mean, they're separate. They're separated there, and we need to somehow update them in space. And that's a very long lifetime, very typical, right? No physical access. But yeah, overall, as I already said, space doesn't have the slowest links, actually. There are some slow links, but there are also very slow links on Earth in different constellations. Definitely there's weaker computing power in a lot of IoT stuff than in a lot of space stuff. And yeah, as I already said, at least modern satellite spacecraft can easily handle standard cryptography. There's no doubt about it. So yeah, the thesis really is space security is still just security. We're looking at wireless security. I've been running very large conferences exclusively in wireless security. It's just the same principles and the same primitives, right? We're looking at jamming, eavesdropping, spoofing. We know that. Hardware security, yes, supply chain attacks, side channel vulnerabilities, all being done at NDSS and all the other conferences. Software security, network security, same story. Electronic warfare coming up now in Ukraine and other places. It's all back really, but it's not new. I mean, we've been doing this for, well, up to 100 years, right, if we're looking at radar. So the question is, do we really need specific space security experts who just do that, or do we, maybe need to change the mindset of the engineers that they think about cyber or work together? How do we improve the state of the art with everything that we already know? We have solutions for a lot of things, but we don't get there, and the question is, why do we not get there? And maybe I also have one second thing, even though I should have been only one, like something positive. Very interesting to me, also coming from aerospace and aviation, there is certainly a dichotomy, also safety and security. It probably also goes into that direction of the engineers, the electrical engineers, building safe systems. But safe systems are not the same as secure systems. We need to bring this together. It's often not done. Security is an afterthought, as we also have heard. Some things, however, can help. So redundancy in itself is not a security measure. But of course, if we're building aircraft, spacecraft with redundant systems, different software and different hardware stacks doing the same thing, that is, of course, also a measure against bugs and vulnerabilities potentially, right? Or it's supposed to be a measure against bugs, can also be a measure against actual vulnerabilities. So it can help. Think about this at the same time and bring it together. So that's the second point. I think we need some research on how really the safety measures impact security in space systems and whether we can maybe go from there and build on it. So yeah, that was my pitch.
Do I wait or do I swap? Oh, okay, yeah. Yes, but how? Oh, okay, yeah, good. Look at that, okay. I'm Steve Schwab from USC ISI. I could always stay, not walk around. And I guess I'm sitting between us and throwing tomatoes. So I'll say at the beginning of my career, I cared about space and space systems and high performance things on the ground that were catching stuff from space. So for me, the units of security were negative performance. I was not a security person. And in fact, the only thing security did to our systems was cost us performance. So I'll put this up there. Space systems were in a phase change. And we all know the number of satellites had this nice, gradual, slow pace. And then, SpaceX starts launching like crazy, and other launch vehicles are coming along. So we're going to get like exponential numbers of things on orbit. We all know this. Launch cost, dollars per kilogram, goes down. It's gone down a lot. It's dropping further. Utility of assets on orbits are increasing. So the stuff we put on orbit's more valuable, and we can get stuff there. Historical design cadence used to be slow and deliberate. Like, 15 years from thinking about a space system, writing all the documentation, to putting it on orbit, if we were lucky. Bespoke ground and space segments. In fact, ground segments didn't even start getting built until basically the space was just about done. Worked better that way. And the schedule timeline was sufficient to address security requirements. We had a lot of security requirements, but we also had a lot of schedule to deal with them, and it was kind of slow, and we could introduce more. So I'll argue we're at the end of closed and isolated space systems. So that's the sense in which each space system, ground segments, space segments, other user terminals, is a unique distributed system, maybe interconnected with networks, but it's closed. In advance, we know everything we're going to talk to in that space system. It's all a fixed universe. Future space systems, I'll argue, necessarily must exist in much more of an open network, maybe not quite the internet, but an open network in which you interoperate to get new services and resources. So if SpaceX or somebody else says we've got a new transport network to the ground and you want to swap out your TDRS and swap in your SpaceX services, you just get them. And if there's somebody else who has storage or computation on orbit, you can take advantage of it. So it looks a lot more like the internet. Internetification is the terrible word. I don't use it. One of my colleagues does when you describe a system. So this phase change happens exactly once. Right now we've got a bunch of siloed things, no matter how we build them. At some point in the not very distant future, there's only going to be the network of stuff on orbit, and you have policy about what you're talking to and not. Okay, so space operational security constraints. We're mostly researchers. We deal with design time things and building it right, but we should remember you got to operate these things. Classical terrestrial approach based on detection, response, and remediation doesn't quite fit security operations for space. The incentives are a little bit wrong, including things like, are we using like CFS in some of our projects that we're doing? I can't recall, but I'm pretty sure we're using proprietary versions that are isomorphic because it benefits the prime contractors to have everything unique, even if it's functionally equivalent. And that's just the way the money flows. The incentives are wrong, but their stuff is just as seasoned. It's probably been used for more than 20 years. And then the timescales are kind of uncomfortable because things we can do with a lot of people on the ground versus things we can do deliberately in space to respond to an attack or anything that goes wrong. People are very slow to make responses when the mistake costs you, oh, you just lost that satellite. How much was that satellite worth? How long till you can replace it on orbit? Computation, communications, and storage. It's great that we're getting high performance compute coming. My calculation back of my head, it's 100x slower than what I can buy at the same time point, which is 100x is not bad. That's my normal ratio. It's better than 1,000x. But it's always going to be scarce and stretched thin relative to the demands placed on the satellites and systems on orbit. And then satellites are embedded systems. They're close to the worst case in several dimensions. They're hard to service physically. Even upgrading them is a pain with software. Intermittent comms is normally a nightmare. Physically demanding environment, triggers for random errors and failures. This flight certification requirements, a number of things we have to test before we can make a change, actually contributes to slowing things down a great deal. So the one key thing, let's focus on catalyzing the phase change, making it happen with research. The positive key area for the security for space research community, security in service of and to enable an open, interconnected, and growing set of assets in space, viewed holistically. And one way to do this, I think probably the best way, fixed point security architecture or architectures. I'm not saying we're going to have one, but if we're going to pick where we would insert our security fixed points that we're going to maintain for a long time in a system like CFS or any of our other space architectures, we'd have a limited set of these security fixed points. We'd do the formal validation and formal verification on those. We'd be able to reason about overall system security properties in the context of those fixed points. So we're not trying to verify everything in our system. And we'd extend the outer limits with respect to updating evolution of the systems that in our architecture, constrained by, well, there's a whole laundry list of security things we have to know about. They are all the normal security things, just intersected with space. But I'll just hit on policy really quick. Young engineers ignore policy. It's where you put the stuff you want to think about. I'll build the mechanisms. We'll say, well, it's policy decisions. But it turns out this is, with age comes wisdom. You've got to define not just the way to define policy, but the policies you start with and how they're going to evolve. Because the people who have to use your security mechanisms don't understand policy any better than you do. And in fact, we've got to codify policy and automate reasoning so that when the system comes into contact with other new resources, the policies can automatically and autonomously update to use the mechanisms to give us security. And so we got to, grow up in some sense and build systems like that. So that's my pitch. one last thing, a lot of space is export controlled. It's always going to be export controlled. It's sensitive, but there's a lot of brain power that is either outside the United States or in universities or both. So by building a system this way, we can perhaps have proxies or subsets of things where we can work with a wider community and still have export-controlled sets where we can apply the technology. Because we got to decouple you can't look at this thing or you can't see operationally relevant stuff from doing the research. Otherwise, we leave a lot of brain power, like 90%, out of the game. And we need the brain power. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for your pitches. I have a list of questions. We can go provocative or we can go optimistic, but I would like to first hear if there are specific questions from the audience that you would like the panelists to answer after their pitches. Is there anything that's so burning that you would really, really want to come to the mic and immediately ask right now in 5 seconds? Nothing burning. Nothing really burning? Yeah, please.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Chris Ellis. I'm required to say I'm an NDSS, Internet Society Fellow. So thank you again for the panel here. Just a little bit of context. So I used to be a space cyber PI at a couple of defense contractors. And one of my questions here, and my other background is vulnerability research. So you can call me an engineer, but I'm very much on that other side, right? So I had the privilege of being part of a technical working group for the ONCD maybe a couple years ago, trying to shape policy. So they invited us a bunch of us in, and I was the only vulnerability researcher. I forget the gentleman's name I sat next to working for Aerospace Corp, and he goes, "Oh my gosh, you're actually one of the guys breaking this stuff, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." So that was my pitch to them, to actually integrate vulnerability research in a more comprehensive, like secure software development lifecycle. So I just wondered if any of you guys had some thoughts on that, not just being security-minded for forward engineering, but really for reverse engineering from an adversarial standpoint. Thank you.
I'll take a swing at it. Why not? No doubt the birds that are already in orbit have vulnerabilities. And I'm not saying anything secret. I'm not saying which birds have what vulnerabilities. But there's sort of an interesting cycle that we go through. Like I did work on voting system vulnerabilities 20 years ago. And we were able to look at them, and lo and behold, they were full of vulnerabilities. And now, 2 decades later, they're less vulnerable, somewhat. Space is getting started a little bit late in this game. And so we need to pick up the pace. We need to fix the vulnerabilities. The one thing that I think makes space a little bit interesting from this perspective is that space has a high need for assurance. So formal verification was on one of the slides. And formal verification is a spectrum, right? From like proving correctness of every single assembly instruction to, well, we've got some unit tests, maybe. And moving further in that direction, I think, is something that can be done. I will briefly toot the horn of a program that I'm separately starting at DARPA called Tractor, translating all C to Rust. If we can do that, we can knock out 70-odd% of the CVEs and get rid of all the weird machines that you exploit people keep taking advantage of. So sorry, but these are the kinds of steps. That's not just a space problem. That's all over the place. And yeah, we need to get space fixed.
We need to get Rust going.
I can add one thing, like since you guys talking about Rust. So just for that reason, CFS as a team, we decided to move towards that, like, hey, just come up with a phased approach and let's provide safe space, like the software. Like if we are waiting for another 3 years, it would be too late. So instead, we decided to jump on right now. Hey, let's work on it. Obviously, we cannot phase the CFS completely out because of supporting some legacy system. So that way we came up, hey, let's go work step by step. Maybe in a few years down the line, we completely replace it. But the good part of Rust is it can coexist with your C apps or C++ apps, and that helps us to go with phased approach.
So there's been a lot of work in vulnerability research, and it certainly has pushed the community in some areas ahead. But practically speaking, it's hard to get access to real space systems. And that's so we if we're going to do it, we're going to harvest the brain power, especially the volunteer brain power that likes to learn those tools and use those tools. And the anger guys and other reverse engineering people, the sort of DEF CON hacker community kind of guys. We've got to get some proxies out there, right? And so they got to be real enough to be interesting, because the exploits are always super interesting. That's what makes people work on them. But they also have to be buffered enough from the real system, so somebody doesn't say, you can only look at them in this room here 2 hours a day, if you're this kind of person, because otherwise we don't really get the excitement. So we have to figure out how to harness that excitement with some challenge problems without, getting the lawyers on our case. So I think that's an important thing. That applies to almost everything in space, but it really applies to this one, because if I said, oh, it's any real satellite and we want to look at vulnerabilities and like sign this NDA and go in this locked room and never come out.
That's a really good place for us to, because one of the questions that I prepared is people have a lot of space security research papers coming along, and most of them are on simulations and assumptions and things. And that's why we put a specific session in the morning just for test beds. But still, it's not an easy thing to get access to these systems. And even when we get access to these systems, we are making a lot of assumptions. So it would be great to have some, how do we move forward? How do we even start modeling things, putting these things together, and so on? I'll let Jeremy also.
Hi, Jeremy Epstein, the required disclaimer, ex-NSF, ex-White House, ex-DARPA, ex a bunch of other things. I'm not allowed to just say one. In thinking about vehicle security, people worked, and election security, people worked hard to figure out a scenario where we could actually do real world tests. And so for vehicle security, people would set up things on abandoned aircraft runways and things like that. So you could, throw the brakes on and do things. In elections, hard to do. We don't like to do experiments on real elections, even though some of our adversaries do. Is there a scenario we can come up with where we can do experiments on real spacecraft in anything approaching safety? And I emphasize the word real as opposed to test bed or something like that. And if not, how do we ever learn whether these are theoretical or whether these are actual real problems?
So actually, I have one thing to add. Very recently, I was talking to one of my cyber folks at NASA, actually, he sits at headquarters. And what he was telling me, like, I forgot which company name, but what these companies started doing is, like, they deployed actual satellite and opened up that for hacking and say, hey, community, come together, hack it now. I don't know. And so we have to do that kind of stuff more, so you can have, like, the community, basically you have access to actually real system, and that is meant for this. So you're not, if you hack it or you do some damage, you're not losing anything. That's the whole purpose, to learn. Can you hack it? If you hack it, hey, what are the things, how we can prevent that? So I really like that idea, and I think NASA or anybody similar, other companies, we need to come together and do more of these, so you can actually learn real stuff there. So I hope this answers the question. And I'm sorry, I forgot the company name, but this was very recent, like a few months ago.
There is the Hackerset initiative, or was to an extent, because Last year at DEF CON, there was no hackaset. Likely because it's extremely expensive, a lot of manpower, a lot of money, a lot of resources to do this. But it was also really the most exciting thing at the DEF CON before last year. Oh, we can hack a real satellite, even though we just get 5 minutes of connection time, once every X hours. Still, super happy that everyone was looking at this. So much attention on it on Hackaset 4, and a lot of people were quite happy with this. But yeah, it's hard to do. You need to be, for that you can probably take part in the CTF, okay. It's a bit artificial, it's a CTF, still nice, better than nothing. There are other opportunities as well. Networked ESA's OPSAT before it was deorbited was offered to quite a few universities, and to do something with it, to collect data, to do stuff. There are university satellites, software. If you ask around, go through a lot of hoops, sometimes NDAs, you will be able to get access to stuff. But it's a lot of work and clearly not feasible for everyone. Absolutely, and we're not even talking about national security implications and that. It's just even with the open satellite systems. The hope, I also agree, is if we go, well, internetification, we typically call it commercial off the shelf. So if we don't have these legacy proven space things that have been going for in space for 20 years, and that's why they keep being used. No, we're using cheaper stuff, cost stuff, that will also be, if you fly it, it has flown at some point, it might work, and it might be much cheaper, more available, maybe less export restrictions, and you can work on it. I think that could be a hope.
So just one thing I'll add, that the modern world of small sats, CubeSats, whatever you want to call them, you can get stuff into orbit for much cheaper than it's ever been. And a lot of these small, cheap satellites are effectively disposable. That they're meant to be in orbit for small number, 2, 3, maybe 4 years, and that's it. That's the service lifetime, and then they deorbit them. So like, SpaceX is constantly launching new satellites. They're also constantly deorbiting the old ones, sometimes into people's backyards. And so what that means then is there's a growing supply of satellites at the tail end of their service lifetime. And that's something we didn't have 10 years ago. So we now have the opportunity to get our hands on these decommissioning satellites and use them for experimental purposes. So that's a cool new opportunity.
Any further discussion? Yeah, please.
Thank you so much for insightful notes. And then yes, I have some I want to argue back about your points that it has been there, but I had a chance to launch my a small CubeSat, and then I luckily could iterate over the full cycle of the operation and from the outsider perspective, because I'm from cyber, not from aerospace. Basically, first of all, most drastic difference is that resource budgeting. In space, everything is expensive. Your power is expensive. You have to carefully budget whether you want to put this cycle to the encryption or maintain your onboard system or something like that. That was really different aspect. And then another difficulty was that ecosystem was highly, highly fragmented. So it was really hard to find the standard a software stack. Vendors are everywhere, so it was really, really fine. Try to find who to talk to, and then what is a problem. That was even a very kind of fragmented, hard to find where to navigate. And then from cyber's perspective, so it is very, very kind of highly vertical integration required. So I had to start from the file layer of the RF. I have no idea what that was. Had to be demodulated, decoded, and then telemetry was all different with a different satellite. That was very difficult. Maybe it was there, but having this kind of skill set into the one single place, that was really, really challenging thing. That was my opinion about that. And then biggest question to you from me is that actually I also having a hard time threat modeling. So what is actual threat? Because it is all about the trade-off. How much do we want to pay to the security versus what is the threat out there? What do we want to protect? So that was my more bigger question to you guys. Yes.
I can maybe start with my perspective, not working in aerospace directly. It's obviously something you need to think about, and the stories that I always hear are the engineers at NASA. I think there was not a keynote here, but at a different workshop, or at JPL, and they say, why would anyone attack our space mission? I mean, like, we're doing things for the good of humanity, and it's non-profit. It's not war or anything. There was maybe before recent geopolitics, but still, that's the mindset. I mean, they don't think that anyone would attack it, and there's no business incentive to do it, maybe, right? But of course, as we know in security, the mindset is very different, and if it can be attacked, someone will attack it, someone will find an interest, an incentive to do so, whether that's a nation-state actor that wants to disrupt the mission for whatever reason, because they can, or somebody ransom, holding your mission ransom, right? It's super expensive, the mission, so if you can do that, you can probably also extract some business case out of there, and people will be doing this. So yeah, for every single mission, you will have to think about what are your threats, absolutely. But in the end, ideally, you secure your mission anyway, right? I mean, yes, if I'm a university and I have a small testing satellite up there and it's just a couple of years, probably no one will attack it. Or if somebody does, the costs are probably okay to just take, right? I mean, maybe. I mean, that's kind of where you need to do your threat modeling. Is it, what's the risk? What's the cost to me? And who might be interested in attacking it? Absolutely.
So I think the threat, people in the military do threat modeling professionally. That's their job. And when we're talking about possible hypothetical future nation-state conflict, people game it out. And they say, what happens if our adversary goes after this asset? And so it's very much we need to have defenses in place just in case this hypothetical that we hope never happens, we still want to prevent it from happening. So it's very much a real concern. And even in the civilian space, the line where military infrastructure ends and civilian infrastructure begins is a little bit blurry. A good example of that is Starlink, that it was built to provide civilian internet access and turns out to be really important in Ukraine. So I don't think that civilian infrastructure, just because the military doesn't own it, is somehow immune from the great powers conflicts.
I can add a few things here. So I 100% agree, things are there, but we have to catch up with technology, as I was saying in my keynote. Things are changing every day as we create solutions. Somebody is there getting ready to break that off. So we have to catch up. And this is true, going back to Martin's question, why somebody would target our system. Maybe that was true maybe 15, 20 years ago. But if you talk about today, I cannot tell the whole story, but people are out there continuously trying to take your assets down for whatever reason. You'll be surprised to hear the number. So that's what I'm saying. This is a need of hour to change your mindset, build a system, secure by design, and most importantly, we need to educate our engineers to put defenses in place. Do not assume nobody would attack. Just assume somebody is going to attack, and what can you do to prevent that? So that's the mindset I was talking about. Hey, change the mindset. Once the community has that mindset, you'll be more secure than usual.
it's always hard to talk about threats in the abstract, and yet the real, we don't hear, every day we hear about viruses, ransomware, stuff on terrestrial networks. There's no longer any question about how often things are attacked, how often things are compromised, and the economic cost, right? So in space, we don't hear, almost ever, maybe never, that a satellite or ground system or something was actually compromised. So you might take that as a signal, well, it's not under attack, but in fact, all these things are valuable, so they are always under attack is the right mindset. We just don't know when that attack will be put into play. So I think it's safe to say that you should build defenses for the worst threat, not for the average day threat. And if you take the worst case, then you're probably not too far off what your worst day will be.
Yep.
Hello, Juan Caballero from India Software. So I wanted to pose a question here more on like code reuse. So I mean, I'm very recently started looking at some of this software. I was very surprised to see like very large monolithic like software here with some pieces that clearly to me should be like standalone reusable pieces. Things, for example, like protocol parsers for like standardized implementations. This is kind of like, there's no point of actually having 5 of these in the same agency flying around that you need to maintain, fix vulnerabilities. Of course, they never receive vulnerabilities yet, so maybe they haven't had to fix them, but that's actually coming, and we'll actually be talking about it in the next session, I guess. But, right, so, I mean, also, like, I'm hearing, like, I don't know, export restrictions on some of these things. I'm thinking, I mean, I don't know, I mean, I have like a secure data link layer protocol that is standardized. I mean, there's no reason whatsoever there's not an implementation out there that someone puts. I'm not saying who it is, maybe this needs to be done in academia, maybe NASA shouldn't be doing this because they need to go through export restrictions, but I mean, that needs to be there because otherwise, like, people are just, I mean, basically they're gonna be unsecure by default, and I guess that's what we are trying to say. So I just wanted to get like your thoughts a little bit on like code reuse and how can we actually move in that direction.
I guess code reuse is great. You have to get people to actually reuse code instead of write their own. So one comment, it's just the incentives are not stacked up to, encourage. Some code is reused, I imagine, but there's a lot that gets specialized. And I recall a friend pointing out, like Kubernetes, Amazon maintains 17 different forks internally because they need them.
Ew.
Or because they refuse to, not need them. I don't,
Wow, ew. Although I guess to that end, when satellites used to cost $1 billion, that meant that the software engineering costs were lost in the hardware engineering costs. They just didn't matter. But now that satellites are so relatively cheap, the software engineering costs matter now. And that's why CFS, and that's the whole reason why CFS exists, is that why should we reinvent the wheel every time? And so thank you. That it really if you were going to launch a small sat, why on earth would you start from scratch? You would start from CFS and then say, yes, but, and then you start tweaking what you have to tweak. And hopefully you tweak as little as possible.
But that's the problem. I mean, right now, they're reusing. I mean, you put CSF, and people will actually go and use it when they're looking at it. You put simple implementations we look at, like libcsp, and actually people get them. It's like super standalone, and they use them in real satellites that they are launching, but they're insecure by default. Okay? Because they don't have, in the sense that they don't have like some of these like authentication as a minimum, right, to actually do that. So we need some, I think, reusable that actually increase the value.
Yeah, and I think I agree 100%. Like, yeah, it's not designed in such a way. As I said, it's the old school, all worked in many, many larger, one of the largest missions. But now, like, we are changing our thought process, we are changing our processes, and we're trying to accommodate all these things. And maybe soon you might see that. Again, sometimes we get stuck by export control and all that type of stuff. Hey, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. So we are trying every bit how we can give this benefit to community, like to the extent possible. And reusability, I mean, that's the whole game on CFS. Like, hey, we want people to reuse it because we got mileage on it. And at the same time, the idea is, hey, if you see some problem or you have some implementation for certain cyber apps or something, hey, let's come talk together. It's like both with street. That's why we try to work with the community very closely. It's not just, we are not 100% perfect. We want to learn from you. So you guys are researchers, or maybe you guys doing something much better than us. But whatever we had worked. Now it's a time to catch up with technology, what you guys have been doing for many, many years on the cyber side, on other technology side. And that's at least since I took over, I'm trying every effort to connect people, understand what people are doing in all these areas so we can take the advantage and learn from you. Is there anything that is missing that could be benefit to the community, to all? Because we know how we do missions, how we can do our missions successfully, all that. Great, we know that. But at the same time, a lot of things we cannot tell you because everything behind the wall. And so the whole idea is, hey, what we can do without breaking our side to give you benefit of that. But at the same time, learn from you. Maybe something is missing already, our side, and we don't know. So is there anything you're doing we should know or we should learn? So that's what we're trying to do. Like a whole game of the community is this. Like, hey, let's come together, work together, and solve all these cool problems. We all have. It's not just us or not just you. So that's my 2 cents.
Any other questions? So we've been talking a lot about satellites in space, but something that popped in my head a couple of months ago was that Amazon has been launching ground station as a service, which brings me to the fact that a couple of other folks have also started launching all these ground stations as a service kind of a model. And what I'm thinking is there any chance that we are going to go down the path of running satellite apps, quote, like having people upload apps to a CubeSat for a short period of time and then making use of it and then moving on? Do you think such a scenario would ever happen? If so, then are there any specific constraints that will come into play? This good old Android App Store, Apple App Store problems that people have been doing for ages. Are we going to go back down that path? Is there even a chance of this happening? Because I'm seeing a lot of CubeSat folks saying, hey, I'm now launching a CubeSat. Do you want something to be run on it? This kind of modularization is also popping up in mostly academic circles, but also folks who are launching CubeSats saying, hey, I have some space. Do you want to test some module? Do you want to put some module along with mine? So this comes into also supply chain issues because a lot of things coming from different parts are going to go into one box. So what are your opinions around this? Basically, this started kicking off based on this ground station as a service, so why not satellite as a service, kind of?
So I'll take this question. So basically, like, I think I forgot to point out in one of my slides, there was, I think, top left corner, there was something called basically very similar to what App Store or Play Store has. So create a CFS app as an app like other apps. So we are creating, right now, the lack of name, we call it a bundler tool. So that would be available. Basically, that would allow you to create a bundle. So let's say, for example, we have on GitHub set up apps. Let's say there are 100 at this point, and you're trying to build some small set, and that requires base services and let's say another 2 apps. So the bundler tool will allow you select your base version plus those 2 apps and say, create me the bundle. And that will create you the bundle with just those apps. So that's the direction we are headed right now. Now it comes to, let's say, so this is the thing like you do statically before you start the design. So you have time to select it. But coming back to question, like what happens when my satellite is in a space now, and then I decided, like, hey, now I want to add a new app. How are you going to do that? Fortunately, CFS has an infrastructure where that allows you to upload new app, actually, brand new app you can upload. And that's the example I was telling for Intuitive Machine one. Basically, they updated one app and restarted. The thing is, like, the restart service like has knowledge about all those apps, so it could restart. So the gap would be like when you upload brand new app to existing satellite. Now the challenge would be how you restart it. So that is also some configuration, like you can change configuration, upload it, that will kick in your new app, and once you reboot, your satellite is up and running with the new app. So we have that infrastructure right now, and we are working on it. But I really love that idea.
So it could happen potentially.
Yes, yes. Answer is yes, and we are on the way.
Any counter thoughts? No.
I mean, I think it can happen. I think it makes sense. The question is, who would take the responsibility? Who's going to sign off on this? And the lawyers and the insurance, cost. Because basically, if it's a commercial service, then I'm letting you run the code. Do I need to know something about you, or do I need to check your code? The state of the art in checking small chunks of code is actually pretty good. So I think we've seen Bitcoin contracts and places like that do a good job in limited areas. So I suspect there'll be some sort of community policy, insurance. You want to get insurance for this. You want somebody at NASA to sign off on it. They're going to have to do some jumps or some hoops. But with the right kind of community agreement, it could be something that could be matured faster. Otherwise, the answer is no, right? Because right. And so I think getting beyond the immediate no is the key research objective. It's like show it could be done, so that somebody can actually do it in practice.
Right. So one more thing I want to add is, I think Steve, you're right about it. Like we don't have everything right now, but this is in the process. Lots of R&D needs to be done, and obviously you would not be allowed, for safety reasons or whatever reason you have, like on your main system, and you go and add new app, and basically that messes the whole thing. So certainly checks and balances would be in place, maybe like HPSC coming on the way. You're running stuff on different partitions, and you might allow, okay, out of 4 different partitions, I would allow you to upload or try a new app on partition number 4. Basically, you cannot do anything. You can just run your system, but beyond that, you cannot harm my system like any other partitions, completely locked out. So could be something like that in the future. Like you are given very limited space to do that stuff, try out that stuff.
I mean,
sure, go ahead.
Isn't that exactly what ESA's OPSAT,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they basically, they allow people to actually upload the code there and run it. And precisely the point there was like to test, I think, the compartmentalization and the isolation basically
Right.
doing that. So I guess the question there is like, what do you give
Mm-hmm.
access to?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How much of the
Right.
But you could imagine perfectly like instruments, right? And only the instrument actually getting access to that, which might be what people. I'm pretty sure people. There's a lot of components in the satellite. They might not need to. They might not even want to touch because they might be interested about the paper. So I don't think it's the future. I think it's already been shown by OPSAT that this can be done and will be done soon.
Right, right. Certainly, you would have to follow certain policies to do that. As you said, like you're not getting access to the whole system, but you have very limited access, and might just come up with certain policies like, hey, you want to run a code? These are the checkboxes. Do you agree? Then great, go ahead. If you don't agree, even in one of the conditions, you're not getting it.
Any final thoughts? If not, I have one final question.
I'll just mention that there's a big difference between getting access to compute resources and getting access to the thrusters. I can reboot the computer, but I can't necessarily recover if you thrust me in the wrong direction. So that would be a more privileged operation.
So this is not probably the best question given the current scenarios. If you had an unlimited budget and zero bureaucratic tape, what's the first thing you would do for space security? I did not say that.
Wow. I do not have unlimited budget, but I can only dream. No, I think, first off, space is like really expensive. You know, when we're talking about like Hubble Space Telescope kind of space, you don't just go and say, oh, well, we'll put another one up. Like, you can't do that. So the challenge we have, one of the constraints of space is that the Hubble Space Telescope or the James Webb Space Telescope or other things that are up there, they are what they are. And I believe the computer in the Hubble Space Telescope is a BAE RAD 750, which was state of the art in 1998 and is still the same chip that is in in the James Webb Telescope 2 decades later. Still state of the art. It's like, think like a Power Mac of the late 90s. More or less the same. Like, that's HPSC, by the way, totally is going to change that game. But it is what it is. You can't go and change it. And so all the dollars in the world can't get you up there to do hardware updates. Or rather, hardware updates are very expensive. Putting an astronaut near it to do repairs, that's not an easy thing. I mean, even if you want to, even if you had all the dollars in the world, we can't just send astronauts to every single bird in space to do a hardware update. So the space forces us to be creative. It forces us to not come up with infinite dollar solutions. Because all the money in the world, you cannot head out to whatever the orbit that the James Webb Telescope is in. Like, you literally can't get near it, because you'll probably break it.
I mean,
Switzerland has a lot of money, I hear.
Yes, but I mean, sometimes people said we were the Swiss DARPA, but we're just this tiny, right, in comparison. So we're also trying to be extremely pragmatic, but I think the interesting point there was maybe then last year's keynote, right, from Professor Greg Autry on policy and how to enable research and development, and a lot of that clearly we see it's also going into private hands, right? I mean, move from Boeing to SpaceX to an extent, and that things are becoming much cheaper. So, but we're not putting another telescope up, but we can easily put another satellite up. And we're not upgrading the hardware of another satellite, we just deorbit it or ignore it and put another satellite up. I mean, that's become much easier, much cheaper, right? So with the help of the many developments, R&D, also from the private sector, but certainly also in military and in many countries, we will see a lot of space being more commercialized, more accessible, more COTS, and that might be enough, at least for a lot of developments to happen, right? So we might not need unlimited money, just quite some, and some time and R&D.
Stephen, Ashok.
Okay. Yeah, so what I would say is basically like, I would spend on infrastructure. We have a lack of infrastructure. We don't have enough people to work on solutions. So if I have boatload of money, no limitation, I will bring the whole world together, all cyber experts. Hey, guys, let's be a team and come up with innovative solution that whole world can use. So, like, we are still so much limited, even this cyber being so critical, but we are so limited on resources. We don't have enough resources to work on things. And a lot of things, that's why you overlook, because, hey, without people, like, how much you can do? You can provide support to an extent, but that may not be enough. So I want to have that enough support in my my definition. Like, we do not have enough support on this area, and we have to have that.
And the last but not the least.
So I suspect that there's actually more room for security experts to work on the systems that are in development. Just hearing about, there's a lot of complexity in these systems. CFS is great, you hear about it, and then you started seeing all the things you have to do when you're going to add or update, and that multiplied by every program and system and every other proprietary fragmented version. So I suspect we just could use the people while they're learning to actually interact with the systems. I think that taking knowledge away from working in sort of space development would train a lot of people. And there's no substitute for actually trying it, because everything, the hard lessons of nothing works quite right, and when something's on orbit and breaks, well, good luck. So I think that's the key thing is we need to have many more attempts at building things and many more failures for experience reasons. I mean, if anything, SpaceX has shown that the key thing, you learn fast by breaking things, not necessarily intentionally, but you do learn fast by building early and often. And so we just need to build a lot more systems. The CubeSats are great. Bigger ones, I think, give us more experience. Interconnected systems seem much more complicated than single boxes.
With that, let's thank all our panelists. Thank you so much for this very engaging panel.